Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I see you, you see me. It is true. It is indeed a Neil sighting. Thank you. Thank you so very much for joining me this morning, this Friday, beautiful Friday, February 25th, 2022 episode of the Cybersecurity stream. You are tuned in to Tea with a Hacker. I'm super excited because today is a very special day. Not only do we have an awesome guest that I'll get to here in a little bit, but we are also broadcasting across Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube today. This will obviously make the mod challenge a little bit more challenging for the mods today as we try to grab questions across all the platforms. You can use the if you're watching me on Twitter, or if you're watching me on LinkedIn and you want your question to be thrown up on screen, you can at me on Twitter, or you can drop the question into YouTube, but I'll get into that here in a second. My name is Neil Bridges, just in case you haven't figured that out yet, and I am super excited to be joined with my guest this morning. Welcome to all of our new joiners as well as our regular visitors. Real conversations with real people, that is direct from one of our guests. This is our short format, so I will run through my intro a little bit quicker than usual. I will just hit the high spots, if you will, when it comes to my intro. We do have moderators in chat. I want to personally thank my moderators each and every stream for their dedication. Really important notes on moderators, and this is incredibly important, right? Moderators are here to keep chat free from racist, sexist, misogynistic, elitist, and otherwise toxic behavior. We have a zero tolerance for toxicity on this stream. Okay, my moderators are here to make sure that everybody's voice gets heard. Everybody's voice gets heard, okay? If you do feel like you should have been timed out or banned because of something you said, this is an opportunity to remind everybody to hit / Discord in chat. If you're on the YouTube channel, you can hit / Discord. If you're watching us on LinkedIn or if you're watching us on Twitter, you may need to head over to the YouTube channel to get the Discord link, but do make sure you are in our Discord channel. That way you can speak to a moderator should something have happened. The other final note, obviously, we've got me here. We've got our guest here, Ross, that we're going to be bringing in here in a second. Questions are not only encouraged, they are incredibly welcome. Listen, nowhere else on the internet do you get access to the amazing amount of resources, the amazing amount of people that we bring on this stream, the experts that we have at our disposal. And so questions are paramount to what it is that we have going on, all right? And so we highly encourage questions to come in from all platforms, from anywhere else. Again, if you're on Twitter, you can at me on Twitter, and I will be able to pick up your question through our software and be able to bring it in. If you're in YouTube, you can just simply drop it into the chat box in YouTube. If you're LinkedIn, we do have a moderator in LinkedIn picking up questions inside of LinkedIn. So we do ask that you ask your questions at any time. There's not a good time to ask or a bad time to ask. Actually, the bad time to ask is when you get off stream and you're like, oh gosh, I really wish I'd asked that question. When I talk about questions, I want to talk about just how literally important questions are. And I get real somber when I say this because I like to remind people, you know, you may be thinking something. You may have a question about something that we're talking about, and you may be thinking to yourself, gosh, should I ask this question? Am I going to feel dumb? The answer is no. Let me say that again. The answer is no. No question you ask is going to be dumb. We are all here for everybody to learn and contribute and participate from this community. This is why we have experienced veterans on this stream. This is why we have folks who are coming into this stream, is so that everybody can learn from the community that we've built here. So there are no dumb questions. And once you overcome that fear, you ask that question, guess what you just did? You know what you just did? You just helped somebody else get maybe their exact question asked that they were wondering, okay? And you may have just helped them. And just think about just how powerful and how impactful that is when you get to ask a question that literally will help thousands of people who may have the exact same question to you. And so again, bottom line is we highly encourage questions get asked. We only have one rule. We only have one rule when it comes to questions, right? That one rule is just ask the question once, just once. I promise you, we got tons of moderators. We've got a system in place. We do try to grab as many questions as possible, as humanly possible. We try to get them answered on stream on our time together. And so I do promise you that we do see your question. We do grab it. And we are trying to get through it. I want to thank our partners in no particular order. Query.ai, net abstraction, Battleship, Attack IQ, VMware Carbon Black. Of course, repping my drinks this morning. Got my @root. Love these guys are my energy drink of choice. You know, I've been on a health kick now for about 6 months. I'm down about 40 pounds. I wouldn't consume anything that I didn't think was utterly helpful and utterly healthy for me. And so these pass my sanity check. They don't give you the jitters. And as you can see from my hype level, they have definitely got me hype. All right, with that being said, I'm gonna stop talking now. You're not here for me. You're here to hear from my guest. And so here in a little bit, I want everybody to put their hands together. I'm going to bring in Russ Brewer. Russ Brewer is, actually, we're going to do this. We're going to make you real big, Russ. Russ Brewer is currently the general manager, vice president from Attack IQ, over all of EMEA and Asia Pac. He's also been the vice president at Logarithm, vice president managing director at LogLogic. He's also been at Symantec. Russ, from the UK, thank you so very much for joining us this morning. The floor is yours, sir, if you'd like to say anything to our audience.
Thank you, Neil, and thanks to the moderators and the team behind. And as you say, the only dumb question is the question that was never asked. So please, we'll take any questions and we'll run with that. Just in terms of my background, I know that you've got quite a few people looking at their careers and looking at careers in cybersecurity as part of your channel, and you go all the way up to executives, and we'll cover some of that later. But how I got into cybersecurity, it's coming up, showing my grey hair a little bit here. It's coming up nearly 30 years, and I sort of fell into sort of cybersecurity, joined Symantec, launched their business in New Zealand in the sort of early to mid-90s. And very shortly after that, we got embroiled in a situation at Auckland University, and it was one of the first major virus outbreaks and virus incidents. And I had sort of 25 administrators all staring at me in the front of the room. Some of them were twice my age, some of them were 3 times my age. And they were all professors, and they were like, Ross, what do we do? Should we pull the cables out of the wall? And we're worried about students, and are they going to riot, and all this kind of stuff. And at that point, this business changed for me. It went from telling my friends, hey, I've got this cool job in the tech industry with this company called Symantec. You've never heard of them. We've got this thing called Norton Antivirus. And it's quite a big deal. And anyway, it went from that to actually being put on the spot in a major incident. And it sort of changed my perspective on what we do and the seriousness of it. And so, yeah, really spent the last 30 years going on from there around the world, worked for Symantec in Australia, and then came to the UK with Symantec in '99, and have been here with my family ever since. But from there, you know, all the old terms that you would recognise, NIMDA, Code Red, Melissa, all those major incidents with people sending hundreds of thousands of people home because they had no email for 2 or 3 days. So as I said, it really made me look at the industry different and take it a lot more seriously, and sort of became a bit of a vocation for me in that regard, and had a fantastic career in the business. And it really culminated in 2017 with my previous organisation, where we ended up commentating on the BBC and going out to sort of upwards of 200 million people live on, WannaCry and Petra, non-Petra, and these kind of virus incidents, malware incidents, ransomware incidents at the time. And then from there, met Attack IQ and met Carl Wright, who's our Chief Commercial Officer. And I'd actually taken some time off after 12 years with a previous organisation to do what you're doing. You can see in the background, I've got a studio, I've got 1950s interview chairs, I've got multiple cameras, and I started this was at the beginning of 2020, built the studio, and then COVID came down. I wasn't able to run to our studio, so did the first CISO interviews virtually, and you know how much editing's involved in this, Neil. It's quite the job, and hey, my thanks and my praise goes out to you and the team, because you got to where I was trying to get to and never did. But anyway, Carl came along and he said, Ross, look, he said, you can play around with a couple of 100 users, or you can come and join Attack IQ and we can build a proper community. And we went about building the Attack IQ Academy, which we'll come on to later. We're coming up on 30,000 students within 2 years, and it's just been an amazing experience. So I put my YouTube gloves, hung those up, and helped Attack IQ and the team, and it's, as I said, it's been an amazing experience. We'll get into some of that stuff later. So that's the history, and it's been a wild ride.
That's really awesome. We will hit a lot of those points this morning as well, Russ. Hopefully, for those who are interested, you can hit !guest, and you can get access to Russ's LinkedIn as well, and you can also hit !Attack IQ and get a link to go to Academy if you're not familiar with Attack IQ Academy. You know, my saying, Russ, is always like, do the free stuff first. And one of the biggest reasons that I'm a huge proponent for everything that you guys are doing at Attack IQ is because you are providing free training for folks out there who are interested in purple teaming and understanding the MITRE team. And I just want to say hello to our Simply Cyber crew that is joining in from Jerry's stream. Hopefully you guys got some good intelligence heading over from Gerald Auger's stream. Welcome to Cyber and Security this morning. Russ, you talk about getting thrust into kind of that incident scenario with Symantec back in the day, and you were pretty early on in your career when it happened. For those who are listening who may not have experienced that yet, one of the things that I'm a huge fan of is reminding people that I think mandatory incident response analyst activity is something that every cybersecurity person should go through for that experience alone. Can you kind of talk about what was going through your head? What was it like to be thrust inside of a massive incident like that, especially at such a young age, especially with people around you that were more long in the tooth in their IT career than you were?
Yeah, and it was extraordinary, actually, and that was just the beginning, and we went on from there. And in that particular incident at Auckland University, it turned out to be one of the most destructive pieces of malware ever seen in the world at the time. There was about 4,000 or 5,000 viruses back then. There's obviously millions now, but there was about 4,500 viruses, and it was in the top 100 of the most destructive viruses ever seen, and it was very destructive. It took out hundreds of machines, and it needed to be rebuilt and so forth. And so when you're in that position, everybody's scrambling, and people don't know what they should say, and obviously. This is nearly 30 years ago. There's a lot happened since then in terms of what we can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Auckland University did actually go public with that story, and it sort of made front page news at the time, but that was unusual. That was one of the first major virus incidents that was spoken about. And so when we're talking to organizations today, it's about making sure that, to your point, the analysts know what, we talk a lot about advanced persistent threats, APTs. The kill chain of an attack and its constituent parts. But if you're sitting as an analyst and you've never seen an APT operating in your environment, well, how are you supposed to detect one? So I think that's the first part of this, which is actually making sure that the analysts have access, either to a cyber range or you're actually invoking that kind of activity live in their environment. And maybe it's known to them. It's a red team being the adversarial testers against the defenders, the blue team, or it's purple. You're doing it in concert, and you're sort of telling them, look, we're going to push these buttons, and you should see this on your screen, and we would hope you'd react in a certain way, or it's blind. So again, it's about making sure that you are training the analysts, and then I remember being in a meeting in the UK, and we had it was a major defence contractor in the UK that was involved in nuclear submarines and all sorts of things, and I'm not giving too much away here because they were fringe to the actual making of the subs. But I'm not going to say any more than that, other than the fact that we had all of their C-level executives in a room, and I was explaining that they really want to think about their incident response and making sure that they even have the notice, legal, and a sort of a call tree, if you will. Okay, if it's this kind of incident, we can handle it as the IT team, tick. If it's this kind of incident, we get the head of IT out of bed. If it's this kind of incident, we get the CEO and legal and everybody out of bed because it's going to be lights, camera, action. And as I was explaining this to them, they were all looking down at their phones and they weren't really paying attention. And I'm like, okay, all right, well, maybe this isn't it for them. Anyway, what was actually happening was they were in the middle of a major nation-state incident into their environment live while I was speaking, and they didn't have a proper plan.
Oh, wow.
So I was saying, so I'm saying this full boardroom with all these people, they're all looking at their phones and they're all pale, going pale, and it's like, okay, and so then it was a case of then you're thinking on your feet and everything's much more reactive, it's much more expensive, and so the most important thing in all of this is to make sure that you've got that incident management plan. You've rehearsed that plan from the analysts through to the management, and everybody knows what the call tree is and what the demarcation lines are. And then ultimately that your legal team has blessed it, and you know how to handle your insurance on the back of that as well.
Yeah, I can't stress enough that I bring it up every time we get a chance. So whether you're on the red side or the blue side, like I think everybody needs to spend that time, solving for incidents, because it is kind of one of those key things that you have to have experience to when you get into cybersecurity. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about what's happening in Ukraine right now, especially from a cybersecurity perspective. I know that I'm pretty sure Jerry talked about it on his threat intel brief this morning. I know I've gotten a lot of DMs about it. I know I've been asked to speak on it on a lot of different occasions already. I'm sure you have too, Russ. When you look across some of the cyber attacks that have just been talked about in the last 24 to 48 hours, specifically, we've seen instances where there's been some wiper malware installed on some Ukrainian systems that's wiping master boot records and things like that. We've seen DDoS attacks against parliamentary buildings and things like that. We've even seen some vigilante hacktivism coming in from the anonymous group to try to assist in their fashion that they do as well. What's kind of your take on all this?
Well, I think that, obviously this is the sort of situation that we've all been talking about for some years now, that we thought we might sort of come to this kind of eventuality where the cyber would cross onto the physical cyber, digital cyber would cross into the physical realm in a live fire situation like this. And it's not just the Ukraine that we're seeing, and this is not isolated to what's happening in the news in this week or this month. This has been building up to, and if you look at the energy sector, the oil and gas sector, it's already a very heavily targeted environment. In fact, one of the largest oil and gas organizations is actually an investor in Attack IQ. So you can imagine how attuned they are to supply chain and the problems that they've had. But this just increases the table stakes for all of the energy companies, because there's going to be this contention between supply and prices in Europe are already predicted to go up tens of percent. And so the whole energy piece, and there's major NATO countries that are dealing with energy as producer or energy as a consumer, and so this is going to have and it is having a big knock-on effect across that environment. Now, whether it's what's happening in relation to the news, or it's the latest incident, the latest Log4j that everybody went into a complete tailspin over the last 2 months over. There's a thing in England called pantomime, where you go with your children to a show, and there's a person there, and everybody in the audience shouts, "But it's behind you, it's behind you." And it's like, where's this bad person kind of thing? Where's the bad actor? And the whole audience shouts, "It's behind you." Well, unfortunately, the cybersecurity industry doesn't realize that we get fixated on these front of face issues, like what's happening in the news with the Ukraine, or the latest vulnerability, whether it be Log4j. And these are just access points and reasons for enhanced activity. The reality is that it doesn't matter where the activity is coming from. We've really got to look behind us, which is in our internal infrastructures, and really start to look at, okay, it doesn't matter whether it's nation state or it's this vulnerability or that vulnerability. If these actors got into our environment, what could they do? Where could they go? What could they get? What could they get out? And that's the piece that unfortunately people get blinded by these headlines and become fixated on looking at what's in front of them, but they're not looking. They're looking out the window to see who's coming down the street. They don't realize they're standing behind them in their infrastructure already.
And I think what you're really also referring to, right, is this idea that, like, hey, these bad actors have had access to these networks for a long time. And whether it was this last Log4j, or whether it was SolarWinds a year ago, or whether it was MS08067, who knows where it was that they got in, we're still just fixated on what's in front of us, instead of validating the holes that have been in our network for literal probably decades in some cases for some of these companies.
Exactly, and the funny thing is, each organisation we meet, and our customers are the biggest of the best and the brightest of the brightest. These are the top red teamers on the planet, and of course, these are people with brains the size of a planet. They're amazing at their jobs, but sometimes their view is, look, our infrastructure is pretty under control. Ross, tell us about your response to the latest headline. Talk us through Dark Side Colonial Pipeline, or Revil, or Print Nightmare, or Log4j, or whatever, because we want to know how we deal with that when the next one happens. Whereas actually what we find when we go into these environments, and as I said, this is the best and the biggest and the brightest, we find that there's just basic controls that aren't configured correctly, they're not being monitored properly, they're not being managed properly, and they're sort of out of sight and out of mind, because we have a challenge in the industry of a project-based sort of approach. We see an incident, we see a vulnerability, we grab a tool, the magic silver bullet for that day, we put it in, and then we move to the next headline. And meanwhile, we're putting all these tools and these controls in, but do we go back and actually check and spend the time to make sure that they're assured, they're fit for purpose, they're doing their job? And then later on, do we go back and say, do we actually still need those things that we put in 3 years ago for that particular, might be SolarWinds in 3 years' time, but, in our rear vision mirror, as an example, and seldom do organisations do that. In the government circles and in military, it's much more sort of focused on making sure that things are tested and assured and continually being assured. But in the commercial environment, less so.
Well, let me push back on you though, because I think I know what you're describing. It's why we have real conversations with real people on this stream, is because, you're right, but at the same time, you're wrong. And you're wrong because the CISO isn't getting pressed about an unpatched vulnerability that may lead to domain admin. The CISO is getting pressed by, oh my gosh, I see on the news, or I hear on podcast, or I hear on a stream that there are cyber attacks in Russia. It runs to the CISO and says, what are we doing about this? What are we doing about Log4j? What are we doing about SolarWinds? Are we impacted? The business, I don't want to make an excuse for it, but the business has forced us to be more forward-facing in our threat landscape than we should have allowed them to be.
Well, yeah, and it's natural, and it's if you look at the CISOs, yes, because they're being the boards. The board members are sitting on multiple organisations. And sometimes it's not a headline. They're sitting on a sister company, not a sister company, they're sitting on a board for a different company, and they see an incident of something and they run back to their company and say, hey, we've just seen this, or we've seen a headline, or we saw something on the news. How do we respond, and what's our answer to that? But that comes back to my point, and it is the same point. I think we're sort of in violent agreement here, is that we need to educate those CISOs and give them the evidence to be able to go back to that board and say, actually, this latest headline is using these particular tactics, the TTPs, as we call them now, tools, techniques, procedures, tactics, whatever T's you want to put in there. Tactics, procedures, techniques, tactics, procedures, whatever. It varies, but in terms of it's using these TDPs, and we've been testing for those TDPs for the last 6 months, and our degree of confidence is that we have a very strong belief that is of no concern to us for these reasons. So then it becomes one of being able to gather the evidence quickly to be able to answer those questions to get the board off the back. But what it typically is at the moment is it's just a fire drill, it's a break glass incident, and a lot of people are running around in circles. And there's a lack of ability to be able to answer those questions effectively and quickly. And it's tough. I love being on our side of the table. I always say to customers, I would hate to be you. You're dealing with all this complexity, cost, the resource shortage in our industry. All of these problems. As I said, I'd hate to be you, and I don't to envy your position. It's a highly problematic environment to respond to. And that's why the CISO burnout is and the turnover is like 24 months.
It's pretty real. It's pretty real. Speaking of visibility, I did when I was researching you to bring you on the stream, I saw something in your history that I was immediately going to poke you on because I saw an opportunity here. And you talk about visibility, and you spent a lot of time working for SIM vendors, right? LogLogic. You've spent some time with some really crazy company called Logarithm, which I still can't believe is even in existence today. Joking, obviously, of course. Isn't SIM supposed to solve our visibility problems?
Well, yes, and that was yes, and that was my chosen career path for 20 years, and really trying to solve that visibility problem. But if you think about SIM, and this is what customers would say sometimes to us, and it was somewhat hurtful. You've told me I'm wrong today, so I think I can handle a bit of pain and a bit of hurt. But it was somewhat hurtful. They would say, Ross, you guys are putting in this technology, and it's great for forensics, and it's great to tell us where the horse went. Mm-hmm. But we really want to stop the horse getting out of the building. So it's a reactive capability as opposed to a preventative capability, and that's why. And in working in that environment, what you are is you are the brain or the heart of the SOC, the Security Operations Center, and it's enormously interesting building these security operations centers and things. But what we found is that because of the exorbitant cost, there's a meme floating around the industry for one of the big, I wouldn't call it SIM now, I'd call it sort of monitoring and analytics company. So let's just say one of the big monitoring and analytics company was purported to be sold to one of the big vendors for $20 billion recently, and somebody put out a meme saying, "Is that was you?"
No, I was pointing to the Splunk flag for people who were missing the innuendo there on that
one. I'm not naming any names.
Right.
Somebody put out a meme to say, "Is that Cisco paying their licensing fee, or is that the acquisition cost?" No, but I know it's funny, but there's an actual, processing that level of data is huge, especially when you've got to store it for years, and so it becomes a real cost versus risk versus reward, and therefore you can never have the whole environment covered with that technology because it's just too expensive. Mm-hmm. So people are picking and choosing. And one of our colleagues once said to me, and he always did a presentation, and it was real simple. He just said, if you've only got half visibility, you've got no visibility.
Yeah.
So if you only got half the data sources going into your SIM, then you're missing so much more. And so that was really the challenge that we faced in SIM, was that cost prohibitive nature of getting everything in. And then there was the challenge of being able to prove out the complex analysis, especially when you started to introduce artificial intelligence and machine learning. How do you prove out the complex monitoring rules that so they've got or even just basic correlation rules, A plus B plus C equals whoop whoop, right? How do you prove A plus B plus C when it's a complex set of controls? And that's always been a big problem for the SIM, and one of the reasons that I got disheartened with the environment, decided to move into something that was more focused on proving the prevention to be in place rather than proving the monitoring to be there should something happen, if that makes sense.
It does, and the challenge you talk about when you talk about having to choose what you put into SIM and what you don't, I've lived that life. I've done three Splunk deployments over my career, and every single time I did it different ways, because you get to that point where it's like, okay, I think I could fit everything in here. I think I could fit everything in this box if I magically try to slice the pie this way. Okay, that didn't work. I still missed everything. It still cost me $5 million worth of licensing to be in here. I'm going to do another deployment at this other company, and I'm going to do it differently over here. You go do it, and you realize you still miss stuff, and it still costs you $5 million to do it. And so the SIM argument is real, and it's probably one of the most challenging visibility issues that we talk about when we talk about being in a security organization. Then if SIM isn't the answer, I want to ask you this: what is the answer?
Well, SIM, I just want to be clear, and again, I'm not bagging out Splunk here. I mean, Splunk is just one of many organizations, and it's a computational cost of compute, cost of product and so forth and so on. So as you say, insert name here, it costs millions at scale. Okay? And that's a problem for the industry because the industry can't keep. The challenge we have in the cybersecurity industry is, our CEO sort of puts this, is that we keep asking for more resources, more services, more money to buy more shiny widgets. And the CFO and the CEO and the board are getting a little bit jack of this endless string of more without us being able to answer those questions. And now they're looking for better. So look, I could go on a rant about the perimeter, that people are spending too much on the firewalls, and then the perimeter moved to the endpoint, and then everyone started spending all their money on EDR and endpoint detection response. So the perimeter moved to the desktop, and then we're still getting owned. So then they said, but if the users just didn't click on stuff and get owned and they're lost credentials. So then it moved to the user entity behavioral analytics, UEBA. And it's like, if we could just monitor the user activity, we'll be fine. So then the perimeter moved to the user, and it still hasn't worked. So my point is that firewalls are still important, EDR is still important, monitoring user behavior is still important, monitoring using a SIM is still important, but what's more important, and the reason I changed to Attack IQ, from our perspective, and I represent an organization here and I've got a job, but it's the belief in the mission that I truly believe in here, is that you need to ensure that all those investments you've made, you're testing them and you're tracing them out to make sure that your EDR is in fact detecting the threats that you intended it to do. It is communicating with the SIM. The SIM is raising the appropriate alarms, and then you can start looking at the SOC, and then you can start looking at the managed security service providers that are perhaps you're outsourcing the SOC to. And so if you look at that and you start to sort of test out all those capabilities, invariably in the complexity you find a lot of obvious holes. And this is the point I was making before about the red teams and everyone fixated on the next headline. The reality is it's these holes that a lot of the low-level, everyone wants to think it's the big bad wolf that's after them with the latest zero-day malware, okay? Right. Whereas the fact it's often you're just an IP address hanging off the internet, or you're just some credentials that's in a dark web repository, and they've got those credentials, they're into your environment, and they're what's called living off the land. So they've got onto a host, they've traversed from that host to another host, they're obfuscating their activity, they're working their way through the kill chain. And most of these hackers, one of my first CISO interviews was actually James Carter, who's the CISO over at Logarithm. He kindly, as a friend, agreed to go on my channel. And in interviewing James, when he was with an IR company, Incident Response, he did 160 forensic investigations, and only 3 or 4 of them were ever made public. And these were the biggest companies in the world and so forth. And what he found, and what you'll often find, is that these hackers do follow a pretty standard path of execution. They do it fast, they do it slow, they do it under the radar, they do it noisily to hide stuff in it or whatever, but they typically follow the kill chain or the MITRE attack tactics, if you will. And so, as I said, it's those tactics that if we were to shut those down, that we can stop the hackers when they get into the environment, living off the land and getting to the assets and getting the crown jewels out of the building, or in the case of Wiper, destructing, killing lots of servers. One organization we're involved in 3 or 4 years ago, they came in, used a Wiper, 2,200 servers, and just wiped them all out. And that put that organization on the knees, to the point the executives had lost so much control of the infrastructure that they were using Facebook to communicate with each other. And that's not where you want to be. That's no fun.
Well, let's go back though, right? Because you described a picture, right, of what we should be doing to test these things out. You're right. It's defense in depth, right? When we talk about, firewalls to network detection anomaly to SIM to EDR to user behavior analytics to security awareness training, we're talking about defense in depth. For those who are listening who may not be familiar with the defense in depth strategy, you're building layers to your castle that the bad guy has to penetrate to eventually get to the crown jewels. We've been doing that for years, Ross. We've been pen testing companies for years. Like I spent 10 years in the Air Force doing offensive cyber for the NSA. I built numerous red teams for some of the biggest companies in the world out there. We've been pen testing for years. Why hasn't that solved the problem?
Because several reasons. One, you were part of a skill team and part of a nucleus of talent that was in the forces. When I did mention earlier that in the forces there's this focus on that because it's in war. You don't just throw a gun on your shoulder and wander out to a paddock and start shooting it, right? You are trained, you are tested, you are drilled on all of that. So that flows, that DoD military sort of flows into cybersecurity, and that's where some of the best resources in the world come from because of that training and that skill set. So yes, you were part of the lucky crew, and I'm sure you did very well in terms of the return on your career doing that. But there's just a general global skill shortage that means that the kind of resources like you, there's not millions of them that you would need to do this at scale. The other problem is that the clients, if you think about, I just think of one client now that has sort of 32 market units globally, 3 major geographical locations. When they want to answer a question, that proverbial question that comes from the board, whoop whoop, headline, log4j, how is this going to impact us? Should we pull the cables out of the wall? Can we carry on business as normal? Well, in order to answer questions like that, if they wanted to red team it, they would have to engage with different red teams all around the world. And then they would have to agree a scope of works, which is sort of, it's a limited footprint. I mean, you can only do, the best red teamers in the world can only do 1% of an organization a month is what we're told. So that's, sort of 12% a year. So coming back to the 1%, so you engage all these red team external organizations, by the way, at a huge cost. This is not inexpensive. These organizations know how to charge. There's no secret about that. And because it's the skill, if you've got a limited skill pool, you've got to get the return on it. So they invoke this red team exercise. It actually takes them between 4 to 6 months to agree all the scope of works because of the different regulatory environments all around the world. It's different what you can do in Germany versus Turkey versus the UK versus Singapore versus Sydney. So by the time they agree all the scope of works, and then they push the button with the multiple red teams all around the world. And yes, you could say maybe they could get one company to do it. They don't. Each division has their pet company they want to use, and so they have all of these companies from all over the world. They push the button, and then the results come back, and then the red team have to consolidate the results, present them to the customer. It takes about 8 months. And what they found was that the result that came back wasn't statistically relevant. And also it was somewhat out of date because you're 8 months on and structures move. So that's the challenge that organizations face: the skill shortage, the not statistically relevant, the expense of doing it, lack of automation, and then also it's somewhat subjective. It all comes down to the brain the size of the planet, that red teamer, what is in their head and what they consider to be a way of going at things. And so that subjectivity leads to inconsistency as well on those different teams. So what this organization, I'm sort of thinking in the back of my head about, is what they wanted to be able to do is to take that question, press a button, and get results in hours on a global basis. And also, there's a big change here, but there's a shift because we have to be doing this in production. So then you've got to think about how to do that in an automated fashion, how you do that safely. Is a big question as well. So this is the big change. It's moving to do this in an automated fashion, do this at scale, and then do this safely. And those aren't easily problems to solve in their own right.
Well, and as soon as you said automation and pen testing in the same sentence, every pen tester who hears our voice today, tomorrow, or in the future is literally screaming at the top of their lungs right now. I can remember when I got out of the Air Force, automation, we had levels of automation that we used in the Air Force to accomplish those menial tasks, those things that we didn't need to spend brain power doing out there. And so when I got out, out, I very much tried to bring that mentality to the civilian pen testing force, and I was struck down hard by my peers. It becomes egotistical. Like we're all about real conversations here. There's no other way to say it. It's egotistical. We're like, no, I've got this big brain for a reason. You can't dare automate what's in this big brain. And so I very much talk to people where it's like, so you're telling me that you want to sit down and you want to nmap, 3 Class Cs every single time, every single pen test over and over and over again. You want to run the same burp intruder or the same burp, scan script over and over and over again, every single engagement you run into. And so you're speaking to me because I've lived that life. I've been very much in that life there. But one thing that you did hit on that I think is critically important, you talk about that 1%, right, of that organization that they're able to hit. For those who have not experienced it, what Ross is talking about is, when I've worked for some very, very big companies. I've worked for Fortune 100 companies. I've pen tested Fortune 100 companies in my career. And we're talking about, they've got Class Bs. They have multiple Class Bs, right? Which is, somebody help me. Whoops, there we go. Thank you, mods.
Thank you. I had lost audio. Thank you. Thank you, moderators. You saved our lives there. As you were, Kevin, because I thought it was big.
Stupid. This is what happens when I cuddle in on the mic. Oh, well. Hit the mute button again. Yes, thank you, everybody. Yes, I hit the mute button. Embarrassed myself all over TV for hitting the mute button. Thank you. Yeah, yes, Neil. There goes Chad. Neil's muted. Yes, Neil is muted. He hit the button again. But you're right. That 1% thing is real because we're talking about organizations that have one or multiple Class Bs, and you've got to try to figure out, like, okay, you got to get a pen test done in a week. You got to get a pen test done in a couple weeks. You got to get a report out the door. You got to move on to the next client. How in the ever loving heck are you going to try to get an entire Class B? And so, yeah, that 1%. That's a real issue because you talk about wanting to test a SIM or a EDR, or you want to test a TTP, or you want to test, like, you're really only testing such a narrow scope of the potential attack surface that exists out there.
And it's worse than that, Neil, because not only are you doing a narrow scope, as a red teamer, it's called capturing the flag, right? Mm-hmm. So you have an objective, and your role is to get to that objective. And so, for instance, if you find that you can get a privilege escalation on a system using one technique, well, you'll just do that. Yeah. And then you move to use that escalated privilege to see if you can traverse, and then you'll just do that. But what say there's 5 other ways on that system to escalate that privilege? So you've actually used Red Teamer. They've validated that there's a problem. You go and remediate that problem, and you leave these other problems. But I just want to drill in on, because this is really important.
Yeah.
As I said, when we're dealing with the Red Teamers, there is this tone of, hang on a second, is this taking my job here?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, there's that little thing, and it's funny because we've just had meetings this week with some of the biggest system integrators in Europe, and they've come to us and said, look, we just can't do enough of this. We can't scale. It's taking us too long to produce our reports for our clients. Please, can you help us? So, which is actually that they're running at us as opposed to going, whoa, you're sort of taking our jobs. And we're finding this in customers as well. So I liken it. Now I'm going to show my age. You're wearing the sandals, not me, and your long hair maybe was there back in the day. I'm going to take you back on a little memory journey here now. So once upon a time, we were mostly Unix, okay? And once upon a time, if you wanted to find some information out on a Unix system, you used a command called grep. And for those command line junkies out there today still using grep, my heart goes out to you. You are the heroes of this industry. And so what you would do is you would grep the logs to pull back some results, okay? And you were the person that owned all the scripts, and you were the person that everybody looked to, and you were the person that everybody had to come to for every query, okay? And it was great. You were the fountain of knowledge, and you were the powerhouse. And then it got tedious because everyone came to you, and you were the fountain of knowledge, and you were the person of all power. and it got really tedious. And that's where SIM actually came from, Security Information Event Management. It took syslog servers and put them into an automated system, and then those Linux, sort of administrators became big SIM experts and all the rest of it. Well, we're seeing the same transition with the red teamers. This isn't about taking anything away from red teamers. You need red teamers to do this. You need red teamers to decide what it is that you're going to test. You need red teamers to interpret the results. You need blue teamers to be able to work with you to remediate those results. So really what this is about is it's about trying to, so if you think of a SOC for a second, Security Operations Center. We throw around too many acronyms in our business.
We do.
We've got to bring the world with us, right? So if you think about a Security Operations Center, you have an analyst sitting there that wants to go after really advanced persistent threats that we talked about earlier, really cool hacking activity. What they do on a daily basis is they take phone calls and answer emails about phishing attacks. And it's boring and it's mundane and it's demoralizing. And that leads to people being demoralized, they don't get job satisfaction, and then there's high turnover in the SOC because people are like, I'm sick of doing this, I'm out of here. So what we're talking about here is actually automating the mundane, trying to automate the digital hygiene and get the teams using higher level tests where they're using their logic and their brain power. And the mundane stuff, some of the things you outlined earlier, are getting automated and taken care of in that way. And the funny thing is now, 2 years ago when I joined Attack IQ, people were sort of looking at us, oh, hang on, is this job preservation? Whereas now we're seeing the red teams, really embrace, because as I said, they're sick of the mundane and they want to pass that mundane on to other people where they can really use their skill at the higher level to do more advanced, which benefits the organization because they're getting to the higher order problems.
I think that to me, that's the exciting part when it comes to breach and attack simulation as an industry, right? Specifically, what Attack IQ has from a platform perspective is when I saw this industry emerge, I was like, hold on, you mean I can stop doing the exact same 50 steps at the beginning of my pen test every single solitary time, and I can focus on writing more exploit code. I can focus on doing more custom phishing, throws. I can focus on more advanced C2 infrastructure to do more advanced red team exercises, right? I think for me, that was the excitement. And so that raising of that skill level, that's very much how I see that the automation is giving you that ability to say, hey, look, it's important for you to understand the basics. I don't think anybody in this industry is saying don't understand the basics, but you just don't need to do the basics every day, right? You need to be focused on the adversary smarter than us. We all know that. It happens every single day as we look at organizations getting popped. We have to practice our ability to get smarter, to do better at protecting organizations.
Exactly. And if you think about the security information event management parallel, somebody said to me the other day when they were talking about somebody who shall remain nameless on this podcast, but they may have been named, they were like, hang on a second, am I the first person to see that a Windows environment where I've got to tell you what I want to monitor in Windows? Shouldn't that just be all table stakes? Shouldn't that just be out of the box? And it's like, hang on, do you mean you're going to each company and you're selling them the same thing over and over again from a professional services perspective? And the answer is, well, yeah, they are. Well, guess what? Red teaming's doing the same thing. And to your point, you're not only repeating those 50 things, but you're recharging for those 50 things. So I was talking to one of our clients yesterday, and what they've done is they've put into their contract with their external red teaming organizations that when they perform a test, that they're to serve that test up and map it to a MITRE attack technique ID, and provide it to the client so the client can put it in Attack IQ and automate it thereafter. Now what that does, it's a pretty smart move, right? Because of that intel, but then it makes the red team actually have to come back next time with something smarter. And so clients are getting very savvy around this. And so this is really exciting, evolving space very rapidly. And coming back to your point around breach and attack simulation, I mean, this is what Gartner called the market. We're not big fans of the term because breach and attack simulation is very red team focused. Whereas if you think about most organizations, you dealt with the Global 100, Global 1000, who do have a red teamer or 2 or 3 or 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? They have several hundred blue teamers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can help the blue team, you can help more of the organization. If you can help the blue team get smarter as well as the red team, this is why we're sort of really focused on purple teaming in our academy. And so that's a really important point, that we see it as sort of continuous security controls validation. And then above that, we sort of see it as really security optimization, because coming back to your earlier point about defense in depth, we have 3 firewalls. But if we look at the threat actors that are likely to come after our organization, do we need those 3 firewalls? Could we retire one of them, take that money and put it into something where we do need a new shiny magic bullet? And so this notion of rationalization has not come to cybersecurity in a big way, but it's coming, and we're certainly seeing that in a big part of that movement.
This continuous testing validation, this is something I've written about in past, before Gartner had coined that entire market. I wrote about, because this is what we had in the Air Force, right? This is you would have the NSA red team that would be persistently inside of key bases throughout the world, and they would see a new TTP from an adversary out there, or there'd be a new zero day that was discovered either by the internal teams or that was released out in the public, and they would then go and test all the controls for some of these key bases because they had persistent access to those pieces of infrastructure. And when I got out, I was like, why isn't this a thing? Why are we not constantly running tests and running simulations and pen testing on the consistent inside of organizations? And I think that's where I quickly realized that the pen testing industry, because of that big brain ego that says, I don't want to automate, you must have me on this keyboard every single time that you do something. Oh God, I'm gonna trigger a bunch of pen testers here when I say this one, right? We've sabotaged our own industry because we've prevented the acceleration or the advancement of that innovation, because we've demanded that our big brains be on every keyboard at every test. And so I'd almost venture to say that because of our ability to innovate into that realm, we've done this to ourselves.
Well, if you said I was wrong, so now it's your turn.
Okay, go for it.
I gotta put that back at you.
Go for it.
Actually, we're dealing with the top red teamers in the world, and look, there is a, as I said, there is a trust, there is a reality around live production testing and the risks that are associated with that. So you've got to trust your provider, and it's got to be transparent. You've got to know what you're doing, and pen testers are in support of that, and they're moving forward with this. And as I said, we've got huge amounts of global teams of red teamers trying to engage us to help them automate and get beyond the mundane. So the pennies dropped, and I don't think it's as bad as that. But I would ask, when did you get out, just out of interest? Because I think there's another thing that we could talk about here.
2013. That was when I got out.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. That's exactly what I thought. And,
yeah.
and the reason for that was, like, when we were doing antivirus and anti-malware back in the day,
mm-hmm.
everybody that came up, and that virus at Auckland University was called Hari 1610.b, and it was one of the Hari Krishna viruses, and anyway, it was called Hari 1610.b. That's what Symantec called it. I don't know what anyone else called it. They probably called it something different. So there was no standardization in the malware industry, and then that led to massive problems. There was no standardization in the vulnerability industry, mm-hmm. and MITRE came up with CVE language, and now mm-hmm. we can all talk about vulnerability. Well, guess what? There was no standardization in the cybersecurity industry where we could talk about threats and actors and the kind of techniques that they were going to use and the procedures and all the rest of it. And the MITRE organization, as they'd done for the common vulnerability exposure when they created the CVE concept, brought in 2015 the MITRE attack framework. And so now for the first time, you've actually got a lexicon, a taxonomy that the industry can start to say, okay, so how does these EDR vendors handle this particular? And those adversarial emulation plans that MITRE attack were doing have proved pretty interesting for the vendors. It's started to keep the industry a little bit honest, and it's caused a little bit of, little bit of mayhem. So with that being said, and then just over 2 years ago now, coming up 2.5 years ago, the MITRE ATT&CK framework became so successful that it was transitioned into the MITRE Ingenuity Centre for Threat Informed Defence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an organisation I would encourage everybody on your stream to become familiar with. And this was something that Attack IQ is very proud to be a founding research partner of the Centre for Threat Informed Defence. So we're part of the consortium now that help develop and drive the adoption of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And the CETID, or the Centre for Threat Informed Defence, is really focused on driving two dynamics. One is state of the art, which is all the technology and that side of it, and the other is state of the practice, and that's the people side of the problem. And so, as I said, if you look at the what the Centre for Threat Informed Defence is doing and all the research projects, there's been mappings around the NIST 853R4, been mappings around Microsoft Azure, there's been mappings around AWS, there's been like the FIN6 adversarial emulation, other adversarial emulations. So there's a huge amount of research work going on now that's giving everybody really clear sort of indications of how you would approach what's called a threat-informed defense. And I know we were going to touch on this at some point during the call, but this notion of looking at cybersecurity differently and being able to talk about it with all of your vendors and suppliers and things. And some of the questions that we're seeing from the chat play into what you'll probably come to ask in a few minutes.
The threat informed defense piece is very awesome, and we have had in transparency, we have had Carl on the show who, if anybody wants to go back and look, can go back to the video section over on YouTube and can go watch the interview that we did with Carl. We talked in depth about threat informed defense, and I just want to, from my perspective. Right. This isn't a product that Attack IQ sells. This isn't a product that anybody sells. This is about changing, to your point, changing a mindset, changing a culture, changing a taxonomy on how we look at, defending organizations. And so, we've obviously got Carl's words on record for what his take is on threat informed defense. What is your take on threat informed defense, and where do you see it driving the industry?
Well, my take is that, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, Neil, and this is where you get to flip back to me being wrong, but I think the industry's broken. I think we're failing.
No, I definitely agree with you on that one. Let's be perfectly clear. I think I exactly agree with you on that one.
All right, good. All right. Well, let's put the premise. And look, I just want to say, I sit on this side. My job's easy. I'm not running 100,000 users with 200,000 pieces of IP technology and the complexity that goes with that. All rest. So just to set the stage, the job is impossible. Yeah. And the job can never be solved. Yeah. Okay. But we are doing a particularly bad job of it, and we are failing in the eyes of boards and business leaders as a cybersecurity field, where we just keep asking for more, and it's like, but hang on, what am I going to get for that? Can't tell you. Is it going to improve our security? We're not sure. We think it might. Why are we doing it? Because there's this big bad wolf in the woods we think might come running at us. Okay. Do we know what he looks like? No one can tell us. So the reality is that we're failing, and we're being owned by what is kids and pretty low-level actors running commodity ransomware. And there's a statistic from the BBC just came out. Somebody just texted to me yesterday. I think 83% of the organisations surveyed actually paid the ransom. Yeah, so that's telling. That's telling. If 83% pay the ransom, then 83% of the people didn't just deflect that it wasn't an issue. They got a problem. Okay. Yeah. So with that being said, where a threat-informed defence comes in is that we come from a background for the last 30 years, and I've been heavily involved in this, and I'm going to put my hand up with everybody else, is what's known as governance, risk, and compliance, which is a business top-down, what we'd call a risk-informed defence. It's internal, it's based on risk, and it's top-down. And the reason we had compliance was that many decades ago, organisations were reluctant to invest in capabilities. They didn't have defence in depth. They didn't have two-factor authentication. They didn't have administrator privileged access systems and monitoring systems and they weren't looking after credit card data. It was being lost everywhere. So these standards came along, but they're primarily fixated on capability. Thou shalt have this capability, thou shalt have that capability. Not should that capability work. Okay,
make that distinction a little bit finer for the folks listening, because I think that that's critically important.
Yes, so you hear this term, compliance doesn't equal security, which means you can be compliant with a whole bunch of standards, but meanwhile you can lose control of your infrastructure in an afternoon and lose control of your reputation that same day. So the reality is that we're security equally doesn't equal compliance. Now, this is where a threat-informed defense comes in, because a threat-informed defense, this comes from the MITRE organization. And again, Attack IQ, we're not claiming, we're just part of the community, and we're proud to be participants in the community. But this is a movement in the industry that's actually saying, hang on a second, yes, we need GRC. That's not baby with the bathwater. We've got the firewalls, we've got the GRC, we've got the endpoint detection response, but we need to complement that or validate that by looking at what's called a threat-informed defense, which is looking at the external factors, the threats, the actors, the techniques, the tools, the procedures, everything they're going to use against us, and then pointing that at our organization and measuring our capability and our effectiveness to propel those threats. Now, the one piece that's missing from all of this is the lowest level, the vulnerabilities, the CVEs, the common vulnerability exposures. Now, the Center for Threat-Informed Defense has just completed a research project which actually is starting to map the CVEs. Now, I'm going to get all acronym heavy here for a second. This is for the what do they call them? The OGs out there, the original gang.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is for the cybersecurity OGs, right? So for the first time in the industry, we've got GRC being mapped to TTP, and now we've got TTP being mapped to IOC. So governance, risk, and compliance mapped to tactics, tools, procedures, and then we've got indications of compromise in the way of the CVEs being mapped back to the MITRE attack technique IDs. And so a lot of organizations don't know that all this research is going on. Many of them are doing that research themselves and then trying to work out what their detection engineering in their SIM should be. And even that work's going on out there. So there's so much good work now. And so going back to your point, how we got into this little sort of diatribe around Center for Threat-Informed Defense and what is the threat-informed defense, is when you came out of the military, there wasn't this language, there wasn't this taxonomy. So you're this voice of one going, hey, I know because we were automating it over there, we got it together, why can't you get it together? Whereas now the industry's getting it together. And this is the most, the MITRE attack framework is probably the biggest thing to happen in 20 years to the industry, and it's probably the best thing because it's actually getting organizations in a position where they can have a conversation with their suppliers and their managed security service providers and their insurance companies to say, this is how we think about our business. And take that one stage further. Regulators now, like the regulators in the UK, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, which is the Bank of England, the testing that they're now doing is going down to that level. They're no longer coming with a clipboard going, do you have antivirus? Do you have this? They're actually coming in and saying, tell us about, Log4j. What was your strategy? How did you go and identify it? Show us your reports. And what about this particular vulnerability? Or this particular TTP? How did you deal with that? So.
No, I think that's the thing that I want to, if anybody was listening to that and was wondering what the key takeaway was, I think the big thing is threat-informed defense, this consortium and this community that's coming out, and the focus in on MITRE, that is critically important that everybody kind of coalesce and center around that. I know that Attack IQ Inside Academy has got some MITRE courses. I've taken them. They're very well done. Hit that exclamation point Attack IQ in chat, and you can head on over to Academy and take those as well. I do think that I've been bearish on MITRE in the past, but having watched it grow over the last 3 to 5 years, I think that they're becoming they're quickly becoming the de facto standard for all things threat related in this space. So I couldn't agree more with you. Ross, we are bumping up on time. There are a couple questions that I would like to throw at you from the community before I send you along the way. There was one here that was talking about, here we go, from Gabriel Silva, one of our regulars. Glad to see you back, Gabriel. He says, why do you, and this is going back to kind of, you went on a little bit of a tangent talking about the skill shortage that existed inside of cybersecurity when we first started up. Why do you think it's so hard for juniors or even experienced professionals to get hired if there's a skill shortage?
Well, I think you've got to build a story, and you've got to sort of target the organization. So when I joined the industry and wanted to get to a vendor, I didn't have the skills to be hired by a vendor. I didn't have vendor experience. So I chose to work with a distributor that represented multiple vendors. In fact, I was targeting a specific vendor. It was called Symantec at the time. So I went to Symantec's distributor and got a job with them. So I think what you've got to do is look at the stepping stones to get you to your ultimate goal. If you want to work for Cisco and you can't get to Cisco, then look at who are the partners that partner with Cisco. And maybe they've got an intern program. And so there's going to be ways of getting into these organizations, and you've got to look at it over the long term. If you're in your 20s or if you're in your 30s, you've got potentially 30, 40 years of your career. It doesn't have to happen in 6 months. So what you can do is do training, make your training credentials relevant, share those training credentials, and then, as I said, target organizations that are a stepping stone. You might be dealing with the local reseller in your market. The resellers are pretty open to hiring new talent, and that would get you some experience in the business. Then maybe you could move on to a distributor or move to a vendor that's only going to hire people with X years of experience, because that's the challenge, that you need to build up that experience. So I hope that helps. I mean, we mentioned our academy, the Attack IQ Academy. This is one of the reasons we started the academy. We have 30 odd training courses on breach and attack simulation, on operationalizing MITRE, purple teaming, all manner of courses that you can take to build up your credentials and make yourself relevant for that first role, or in fact a future larger role.
Diraj, I think, I'm sorry if I butchered that a little bit. I think this gets back to how we came to the conversation about how we drive cyber advancement. Says, do you guys think it's upside down regarding cyber advancement, industry driving military innovation? Which way should that go? Should the military be driving our cyber advancement, or should the industry be driving the cyber advancement?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I was fortunate enough to have an Air Commodore on staff in a previous role, and he was a navigator and flew a lot of flew Nimrod spy planes and fighter jets and things like that. And when you come from the military, the level of training, when you've got a 10 or 20 or $50 million object at your hands, they don't just let you go. They don't just let you take that for a ride, right? So the level of training in military and the attention to detail, and I'm not a military person, but I've got a lot of military friends and I've employed a lot of military people. One thing that they reek of is experience, training, and professionalism, and I think that rigor is good for the commercial world, and I think the commercial world lacks that same rigor because the table stakes just aren't as high when you're dealing with life and limb and so forth. And so I think we can still learn a huge amount from the military, and the military is operating in areas with respect to the cyber war, whatever we're in the middle of globally, whatever term you want to put on it. The military, unbeknown to us, are really at the face and the forefront and have the best brains and the best talent. A lot of the best people come out of the military into cybersecurity or law enforcement because they've been acting in the real world. So I still think commercially we've got a lot to learn from the military, but then conversely to your point, I think the military does have some lessons to be learned from the innovation if you think about the Google, fail fast, fail often,
Yes.
and iterate and innovate, the military's a little bit stuck in its ways because of that complexity in lives and things at stake and all the rest of it. So I think there's learnings for both sides, but I'd still put a military person ahead of a commercial person when it came to organisation and knowing what they needed to do to be successful.
Obviously, I do come from a military background. I agree with you, but I agree with you on the same principles that you said, right? The military, and this was what I've always tried to bring coming out of the military, is that discipline, that focus, that structure. And it's not structure in the sense of like, it must be step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4. It's that structure because we do need organization. We fail at organization. To your point earlier, we've got all these things that we do in cyber. We still fail daily on it because we're a haphazard mess, because we can't get our act together in some ways, and so I agree with you on that. But I'm glad that you said the part about how the military doesn't move agilely enough, because I do think that is a key lesson that they could definitively learn from the private sector, is how to move more quickly to respond to the way the world changes around us. Ross, thank you so very much for hanging out with us this morning, your afternoon, nighttime for the folks over, on the other side of the globe. I know we've got some folks in Australia and New Zealand as well who are still tuned in. BSEC coming through with the closing remark says, if you are not automating, you are just asking to be left behind. I couldn't agree with you more, BSEC. Ross, the floor is yours. Everybody in chat, give a round of applause for Ross. Thank you so much for joining us. Any last parting words before I send you on and talk to my community?
No, I just want to thank you, Neil. It's been an entertaining conversation, and I hope this has been valuable to the listeners. And I think that those looking for careers, the change in the industry, there's a massive revolution in the testing environment. And so, as I said, we've got the Attack IQ Academy. We're doing the work that we're doing with some of the largest technology companies, financial services organizations, critical national infrastructure, and the amount of interest we're seeing. This is a space certainly worth investing in, and one that is going to be here for the long term. When we were doing the SIM 25 years ago, no one knew what it was, no one had heard of it, and it was hard to explain. Whereas now it's everyone's got one. So this is the new order that's happening, and watch the space.
Absolutely. Ross, I'm going to send you on. You and I will chat later. We'll catch up some other time. Thank you so very much for joining me today. Awesome chat, cyber and security community. That was fantastic to have somebody with the breadth and depth of experience, somebody like Ross, somebody who can dive deep on a lot of the strategy and the technical side of things. And so this was awesome. I'll answer a couple questions. I do have a hard stop here in 20 minutes for a meeting that I have to go to personally. But I just saw this one. What are your beliefs on the future of pen testing? I personally believe in this. Is a guy who has spent his entire career on the red side, doing offensive cyber for the Air Force, building and managing a lot of red teams throughout my career for some of the largest Fortune 100 companies that are out there. I definitively think breach and attack simulation, that's how Gartner calls the world, and I appreciate Ross and the team's perspective on it. But companies like Attack IQ, and specifically Attack IQ because I have used their software before, I've deployed it, that is the future of pen testing. And that's going to anger a lot of people, but it shouldn't. You should be embracing it. You should absolutely be embracing it. You should be going over to Attack IQ. You should be learning from their academy. You should be following up with MITRE, and you should be following this trend of threat-informed defense, because I think this is what's going to separate you in your pen testing career from everybody else who's out there learning CEH or anything else like that. I think if you are smarter in breach and attack simulation, if you're smarter in this threat-informed defense space, I think you're going to be doing yourself such a huge favor in this space. So with that being said, you can hit !guest. You can get access to Ross's LinkedIn profile. You can hit !Attack IQ and head over to Attack IQ's page and take a look at some of their stuff over there. I'm looking through some of the questions that we got just to see if there's anything here that I'll give. I've debated on whether I was going to do a special stream or not, talking about the Ukraine-Russia war in terms of things. stand by to stand by. I may do a special stream either later today or sometime on Monday to kind of give my thoughts on how this is all going to go down. Trying to formulate my thoughts into, I want to see how things transpire over the next 24 hours, see if there are any more cyber attacks that we can talk about. I'll talk to a little bit about what I know from being on the inside at the Air Force, at the NSA when we were doing a lot of that stuff. And so stand by to stand by on this, but I will be giving some form of my analysis on this at some point in time. Henry says, is this a new microphone? I am trying out the Elgato Wave 3. So far, I like it. It's not an XLR. It's a USB mic, and so I'm trying out the USB mics. Some of you know that I've been replacing some of my equipment with the Elgato stuff, just kind of seeing how the quality of it is and how all that's shaping out. And so, yeah, right now I'm using the Elgato Wave 3. They're not a partner of the stream. There's no affiliate code. If it sounds good and you like it and you want to use it for your own setup, then go for that as well. This is an interesting question from Daraj again. I asked this yesterday as well. What is the current legal climate like regarding black hat forum research for white hat and analyst? Any open source intel portals forums you recommend for beginners? I presume you're talking about just the ability to do your own research, if you will, on black hat forums. What's the best way to kind of get into that space, if you will. I wouldn't really rely on a publicly distributed threat intelligence center when it comes to looking at black hat forum research. I think I've mentioned this before on stream. There's really kind of like 4 layers when it comes to black hat forums that are out there, right? You've got the ones that literally anybody and their brother or sister can access. You don't need anything special. You go out there, you create an account, and you access anything. They're very frequently like Alpha Bay, these markets that are out there, right? You've got kind of the second one, which is you have to have a referral code. You have to know somebody who can get you a referral code, and you can get access to them. Now, those are still not impervious because law enforcement definitively has ways that they get referral codes. Intelligence agencies definitively have ways that they get referral codes to get into those. That's how they're able to collect intelligence on those forums. You kind of got the third way, which is you have to be known. You have to have proven that you've hacked something. You've got to be able to provide that proof over to one of the moderators. You've got to have those chops, if you will, to get access to those forums so that you can then participate in that community. And then you've kind of got like the fourth one, which is it's not on the dark web. It's not on the clear web. It's probably in a Telegram channel. It might or might not be in a Discord. It might be on I2P. It might be on a completely closed network. And literally the only way you're getting access to that is if somebody in that circle reaches out to you and says, we want to invite you into this circle or into this club. And so when you look at it on those 4 levels, you as a white hat intelligence analyst trying to gain access to these forums will probably ever achieve that bottom tier of intelligence gathering. You might, if you're lucky, be able to work for like a Recorded Future or a Threat Connect or a government entity or something like that, where you might get access to the second level. But outside of that, you're not going to get access to anything else. And so anything that you see out there that talks about dark net intelligence, 9 times out of 10 probably only exists at that bottom level right there. So lots to digest there. Hopefully that made sense in terms of that. I think that'll be the last question, looking at the pool of questions that I'll take for today. Thank you all so very much for tuning in to today's cyber and security stream. Remember, smash that like button. If you are checking us out on LinkedIn or Twitter, thank you so very much for experimenting with us over on LinkedIn or Twitter. I do see we got a ton of viewers over on LinkedIn. We had a massive amount of viewers on LinkedIn. So I wanted to give a huge shout out to everybody on LinkedIn who tuned into us this morning. That worked out better than I thought it did. And listen, I appreciate every single one of you, and every single one of you is awesome. And listen, whether you're on the red side or the blue side or still deciding, keep learning, and I'll see you next stream.